Looking forward to becoming an Australian citizen? Well, in this case, there's one thing you need to prepare for: the Australian Citizenship Test. Yes, that's right. The Australian government wants to make sure that you fully understand what it means to be Australian, our history, our beliefs, and what we stand for, before granting you an Aussie passport. So, what's the test all about? Well, it's a multiple choice exam that's done on a computer. You'll be asked 20 questions about Australia, including its democratic system, beliefs, and values. Now, here's the important part. To pass the test, you've got to get all 5 of the values questions right, and you need an overall score of at least 75%. But don't worry, the Australian government has put together a booklet to prepare for the citizenship test, and we, from English Unlimited, are here to break it down for you and make it as easy and as fun as possible. Besides learning about Australian history, beliefs, and values, it is very important that you know all the words we need to talk about them. To help you with this, we have created an interactive vocabulary list on Quizlet, which is linked below in the video description. Quizlet allows you to create and play with vocabulary sets. It's completely free and does not require creating an account. So I advise you to pause the video now, click on that link, and have a look at those words. They'll be very useful to understand these videos, and also the questions in your citizenship test. Okay, now next step is to understand how the test is structured. The most important sections of the Australian citizenship booklet are parts 1 to 4. So we will look at each of them in separate videos. Part 1 is Australia and its people. Part 2 is Australia's democratic beliefs, rights and liberties. Part 3 is government and the law in Australia. And part 4 is Australian values. Remember, you have to get right all questions for this part. So, this video will tell you everything you need to know about part 1, Australia and its people. We have divided this video in different sections, following the Australian Citizenship booklet. People of Australia, Australia as a nation, Australia's states and territories, Australian traditions, important days for Australians, and finally Australian flags and symbols. There are also timestamps provided in the video description, so feel free to skip to the sections you are more interested in. Alright guys, let's get started. Part 1, Section 1, People of Australia. To start off, let's look at the first people who ever lived in Australia, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Aboriginal people came from mainland Australia, which means the big main island of Australia, and Tasmania, which is a smaller island but still part of Australia. Torres Strait Islander people, on the other hand, come from islands between the north coast of Queensland and Papua New Guinea. They have been in Australia for over 40,000 years, which makes them some of the oldest continuing cultures and traditions in the world. They also have a strong connection to the land, which is shown in their stories, art and dance. Now let's talk about the first Europeans that came to Australia. In 1788, the first fleet of British prisoners arrived in New South Wales because British jails were too full. Yep, you got it right. Australia was originally England's external prison. New South Wales was the first established colony, and Captain Arthur Phillip was its first governor. With time, more and more prisoners and other people interested in a new adventure came here and established new colonies, which were something like new cities. These people were mostly from England and Ireland, and these cultures have had a major influence on Australia's recent history, culture, and politics. However, population in Australia really started increasing in 1851 due to a gold rush, meaning people running to Australia looking for gold. People from all over the world, including Chinese migrants, came to Australia to try and become rich. For this reason, Australia's population more than doubled in just 10 years. Incredible, right? Now, let's look at our second section, Australia as a nation. Australia became, for the first time, a unified nation in 1901, when the separate colonies were united into a federation of states called the Commonwealth of Australia. This is when, for the first time, we had a parliament, a government, a high court, and an Australian constitution. At the time, the population was about 4 million, but that didn't include Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. It wasn't until after a referendum in 1967 that they were included in official estimates of the Australian population. Now, I'm sure you know that now Australia has a high number of migrants, meaning people moving here in search for a better life. But did you know that it wasn't always the case? That's right. In the first half of the 20th century, there were programs to encourage British migrants to settle here. Then, after World War II, so mid-1950s, there was a wave of non-British migration and a lot of Europeans came to Australia to build a new life. Although English is our national language and an important part of our national identity, we also value other languages, including over 100 different Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander languages. While we celebrate our diversity, we also aim to build a cohesive and unified nation. That's why we encourage migrants to learn and use English to help them to participate in Australian society and make the most of living and working here. Okay, now let's get into a bit of geography to put everything we've discussed into place. Australia has 6 states and 2 territories. The states are New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, Western Australia, South Australia, and Tasmania. The 2 territories are the Australian Capital Territory and the Northern Territory. Let's look very quickly at what is particular about each of them. So, New South Wales was the first colony established by the British, and its capital city is Sydney, which is also the largest city in the country. You might have heard of the Sydney Harbour Bridge and Opera House, which are national icons. Okay, now Victoria. This is the smallest of the mainland states, and its capital city is Melbourne. A lot of the fancy buildings in Victoria were built from the wealth created by the gold rush of the 1850s. Some of Victoria's icons include the Melbourne Cricket Ground, the 12 Apostles, and the Royal Exhibition Building. Queensland is the second largest state, and its capital city is Brisbane. The Torres Strait Islands are located to the north of the state, and the Great Barrier Reef runs along its eastern coast. Queensland has tropical rainforests, temperate coastal areas, and an often dry inland. Western Australia is the largest state, and its capital city is Perth. The east of the state is mostly desert, while the southwest is a rich agriculture and wine growing area. Western Australia is home to many large mining projects, and some of its icons include the Ningaloo Coast, Margaret River, and the Kimberley region. Moving on to South Australia, it has a rugged coastline and many famous wine regions. Adelaide is the capital city and has many examples of fine colonial architecture. South Australia's icons include the Barossa Valley and the Flinders Ranges. Tasmania is the smallest state and is separated from the mainland by the Bass Strait. Its capital city is Hobart, and much of the island has beautiful, wild, untouched landscapes. Tasmanian icons include Cradle Mountain, Port Arthur, and the Bay of Fires. Now our 2 territories. The Australian Capital Territory is between Sydney and Melbourne, and is home to Australia's capital city, Canberra. Several national institutions are located in Canberra, including Parliament House and the High Court of Australia. Lastly, the Northern Territory has a tropical environment in the north of the state and dry red desert in the south. Darwin is the capital city, and some of the Northern Territory's icons include Cathachuta, Kings Canyon, and Uluru, which is a huge rock in the centre of Australia that is very important to Aboriginal people. So we're done with Australian history and geography. Phew! Feel like you know a bit more about Australia? I hope so. All right, next section is Australian traditions. Have you ever heard of a welcome to country or an acknowledgement of country? If not, don't worry, because I'm about to tell you all about them. Now, these practices are performed to show respect for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and to acknowledge the land and its traditional owners. In particular, a welcome to country, as the name suggests, is a way of welcoming visitors to their traditional land and is normally performed by the custodians of that land. It's usually the first item in the agenda of a public event, such as a conference or an important sports event. On the other hand, an acknowledgement of country is an opportunity to recognise that that event is happening on Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander land, and can be done by anybody who wants to pay their respects. Even if at meetings or events, it's usually done by the person in charge. Paying our respects to Indigenous Australians and their families is something very important in Australia. So it's good for you to know about these traditions for your future life here, not only to pass the citizenship test. Now let's look at important days for Australians. So the two most important days in Australia are Australia Day and Anzac Day. Australia Day is celebrated on the 26th of January every year and is a public holiday in every state and territory. In Australia, this day marks the arrival of the first fleet from Great Britain in 1788. It's a day where communities across Australia reflect on our history and the people who have contributed to making Australia what it is today. During Australia Day celebrations, the Prime Minister announces the Australian of the Year Awards in Canberra. It's an exciting time for us, and there are events happening all across the country, including special citizenship ceremonies, so maybe you'll be lucky and yours could fall on Australia Day too. Now let's move on to Anzac Day, which is celebrated on the 25th of April every year. Anzac Day is named after the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, ANZAC, which landed at Gallipoli in Turkey during World War I on the 25th of April 1915. On this day, we remember the sacrifice of all Australians who served and died in wars, conflicts and peacekeeping operations. We also honour the courage and commitment of all servicemen and women and reflect on the many different meanings of war. Okay, time for our last section, Australian flags and symbols. I'm sure that all of you recognise the Australian national flag. This one. But did you know that there are two other official flags in Australia? Let me tell you a bit about each of them. Let's start with the Australian national flag. It's made up of blue, white and red. In the top left corner, you'll see the Union Jack, also present on the British flag, which represents our history of British settlement. Just underneath is the Commonwealth Star, which has 7 points. 6 representing Australia's states and 1 representing Australia's 2 territories. I have no idea about why there is only 1 point for 2 territories, but that's definitely the explanation the government gives. So we'll have to take that as true, at least for your test. Now, lastly, on the right-hand side, you'll see the Southern Cross, which is a group of stars that can be seen in the southern sky. Next, we have the Australian Aboriginal flag. This is made up of black, red and yellow. The top half is black and represents the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, while the bottom half is red and represents the earth, and the yellow circle in the centre represents the sun. We said before that land and nature have great importance for Aboriginal people, so that's why these elements are represented in this flag. Now let's talk about the Torres Strait Islander flag. It's made up of green, blue, black and white. The green stripes represent the land, while the blue panel in the centre represents the sea, and the black lines represent the Torres Strait Islander people. In the centre, you'll see the white dancer's headdress, which is a symbol for all Torres Strait Islander people. The point of the white star represents the island groups in the Torres Strait, and the colour white symbolises peace. Let's look at some other Australian symbols now. It's just 4 of them, so this is going to be really quick. First one is the Commonwealth Coat of Arms, which is like Australia's official logo. It's a symbol of our national unity and represents the authority of the government. In the middle of the shield, there are 6 smaller shields that represent each state and territory. Again, I know numbers don't quite add up, but that's what it is. On each side of the shield, there's a kangaroo and an emu, which are 2 animals very characteristic to Australia. Above the shield, there's a gold star, which is called the Commonwealth Star. The background of the coat of arms is the golden wattle, which is Australia's national flower, and also the next symbol that we're going to discuss. So yes, the golden wattle is Australia's national flower. It's a small tree that mainly grows in the southeastern part of Australia. In springtime, it has bright green leaves and lots of golden yellow flowers, which in turn takes us to our next symbol, Australian national colours. In case you haven't gotten it yet, they are green and gold, just like the golden wattle. These are also the colours that athletes wear in sports competitions when they represent Australia. And finally, guys, Australia's national gemstone, the opal. According to Aboriginal legend, the colours of the opal were created when a rainbow touched the earth. It's a beautiful gemstone that is unique to Australia, and also a beautiful idea that it may have been created by a rainbow touch. Alright guys, well done for completing part 1 of your Australian Citizenship Test preparation. One last element of this section that you will see in the booklet is the Australian National Anthem. We have created a separate video for that because it has old words and is a bit difficult to understand. However, it will be played at your citizenship ceremony, so it will be great for you to fully understand what it says and maybe even to sing along to celebrate your new Aussie life. You'll find the link to it in the video description, so feel free to watch anytime before your ceremony. Well, goodbye for now, and we'll see you very soon for part 2, Australia's democratic beliefs, rights and liberties. See you guys.